Well, welcome to Security Day 2022. I'm Dave Howell, the Editor-in-Chief here at Silicon UK. Cyber resilience, business community, and the security of those businesses is really the cornerstone of, I think, everyone is really thinking about these days, particularly for businesses within the security space. This Silicon Security Day is hosted by Silicon UK and NetMedia Europe. The event showcases the current digital security challenges facing enterprises today, and also presents practical, real-world solutions that businesses can use to secure their digital assets. Organizations are increasingly aware of the need to adopt to new security approaches, particularly Zero Trust and EDR, by taking measures to ensure that businesses have a continuity of security right across their estates. Enterprises also need to manage the critical situations, including ransomware attacks, identity theft, and the impacts on their supply chain, which can be disastrous in some cases. But there are certainly practical applications for security to mitigate and remove all of those issues if a security strategy is developed. Throughout the day, you'll hear from expert speakers, which will touch on various aspects of digital security. I hope you find the Security Day 2022 insightful. Before we actually speak to many of the speakers that we have today, who are going to touch on some specific areas of digital security, I also wanted to give a short presentation about, I guess, the key trends. What's kind of happening in the security space today, and how that impacts your businesses, and particularly as we move forward into 2023. I'll be covering some key aspects of cybersecurity trends, particularly as they affect enterprises. Also paying close attention to network security, data, workforce security, and also really what the practical aspects of that are for each of your businesses. I've entitled this presentation sort of Beating the Barbarians. Many of you may have seen that phrase used a lot with the security space, and it kind of describes really what security means for enterprises generally. We're trying to protect our businesses from threat actors, and they are getting more diverse, and they're certainly getting more difficult to identify as digital security has moved on, certainly from the brute force attacks, which we may have seen just a few years ago. Today, the threat vectors that we're all having to, I guess, deal with are manifold, and they can be very subtle. And of course, they are absolutely using lots of social engineering. That's certainly seen an increase in usage by threat actors, as they've used various vectors to attack the businesses that they want to penetrate. Really, it's a case of, what does the new business landscape actually look like? I think 2022 was challenging for enterprises, particularly in security, with consumers losing trust in businesses' ability to keep their data safe. An amazing statistic: more than a third, 35%, say that they don't trust a company that does not have adequate security policies. That's a very telling number, I believe, and also 45% have stopped or would stop using a company's services if they didn't feel security was really resilient enough, and it was protecting their data, protecting their payments, protecting their identity as they are actually using businesses. Now, moreover, the complexity of enterprises' IT environments continues to grow. And of course, with that, the actual threat landscape itself also becomes more diverse. In particular, APIs, one of the foundation pillars of modern internet, are increasingly under assault. API security costs something like 75 billion a year with penetration testing, and that's something that really has to be mitigated by most businesses, as APIs certainly become a central core of particularly e-commerce as we move forward. A lot of businesses are looking for headless commerce. They're looking to move towards the modular use of APIs, microservices, and moving away from the monolith. That's an absolute given. And of course, APIs are a core part of that, and therefore they are part of the threat landscape. E-commerce businesses must move away, certainly, from the monolith, but they also must look at really what their security looks like as a landscape. And by that, I mean, we're looking at SaaS, we're looking at cloud. Absolutely. The cloud is still part of that conversation, and clearly must be protected for most businesses, and particularly their customer-facing solutions. Also, we're seeing and later organizations have workforces which are remote. And of course, that also opens a potential door for the barbarians. How do we protect our remote workforces from clear security attacks? Work processes have changed. If people are working remotely, they are logging on to networks, obviously, from various locations. And of course, a dispersed workforce can potentially be a security threat there. And it's no surprise that threat actors are looking at those groups of people and individuals as certainly a way to move into an organization. Lastly, organizations really have to think about, I guess, what a threat actor is for them. How do they define who those people are, those groups or those individuals which are attempting to sort of penetrate their networks? The threat perimeter has clearly moved. It is no longer just where your server is. It's certainly not where your data center is. That threat perimeter could literally be the mobile phone of each individual worker. What I'd like to get over, I think, today is the threat perimeter is now absolutely diverse and absolutely dispersed, and you must protect your business from all attacks across all surfaces. Now, that may seem very, it may seem an insurmountable task to do that if you have obviously several thousand employees, but it is absolutely a practical aspect. You can actually do that. It is possible. Do not feel that a dispersed workforce is a intrinsically insecure workforce. It is not. It is absolutely possible to secure all of those individuals. And also, I'd like to point to a presentation which will be given by KnowBe4 today. In that, we'll be speaking about the culture of security. What does that mean? How do you develop a security culture? That may be something that you may haven't heard before, connecting culture and security together. But it's an absolute important and absolute given that you must do that within your business, because again, your people are part of the security solution. And if they're aware of security, and if they're aware of the possible attacks that it can come under, that raises your level of readiness, really by a massive level. If you can create a culture within your business which is secure, so I would encourage you to watch the KnowBe4 presentation, which will talk in depth about all of that and how you can actually create that within your business. Now, I want to talk about one particular kind of security threat. Ransomware, of course, it's been around for some time. But ransomware is also an evolving attack vector, absolutely. As Palo Alto Networks mentioned, and organizations, networks are a given. We cannot live without those, so we have to protect them. But I think the takeaway from this slide is absolutely that we need to spend more time and unfortunately more money protecting our networks. And it would appear that businesses are being very aware of that. I see a trend in 2023 where the allocation of budgets for security will absolutely increase. I think the State of the Workforce Security Index is absolutely correct. I think businesses are making strategic plans for next year for increasing budgets for security. And that can only be a good thing, because that really then secures the networks, it secures their workforce against possible attack. I'd like to point to, I think, one trend which I saw this year, you may have seen in the press, and that's callback phishing. Again, an evolvement of phishing attacks and an evolvement of ransomware. With a callback attack, initially there may be an email, as usual, with these effects. But then the threat actor will then follow that up with one or two phone calls, again, to make that personal connection with a person that they are trying to influence, to give obviously login details, and then to access a network. I'd stress that callback phishing is just one of many threat vectors which are affecting businesses. But the callback phishing, I felt this year as that evolved, that was a worrying trend, because again, that was not just an email with an attachment, which your business may already be protecting itself against. Connecting that with voice calls and connecting that with maybe a call from a bogus tech support individual. That's a worrying trend, because that really does open a potential door for the barbarians to enter a network, because they've obviously asked for sensitive login information. What I would say to businesses, again, you are absolutely not powerless to combat that. Again, I would come back to what I said earlier, that a strong and resilient security culture within your business can absolutely mitigate those phishing attacks. It's just that the two vectors, maybe even more than two, which connect an email with voice calls, that's a worrying trend. But again, that's something to be very aware of in your business, particularly remote workers who maybe don't have access to call desks as they used to. But again, that's something that you can all absolutely mitigate with a good cybersecurity culture, but also putting in place tools and processes to again strip out those attachments, to highlight to your workforce that's something may be happening on their email which they need to pay attention to. So I would pay attention to callback phishing. If you ask me, is the one thing that we ought to have a good look at early in 2023? I would say that's it. It's that multi-vector approach is it's not new, but it's certainly more sophisticated than I've seen with other ransomware attacks. Connecting the two together is quite an interesting development, and something businesses really must pay attention to. I would like to move on again to ransomware, phishing attacks, and also really to pay attention to really what's happening next. I think we all focus on email. We all focus on potentially damaging attachments, and that's certainly something that we can all pay attention to. What I would say next year is this phrase of zero trust. I think that will become certainly more prevalent across businesses. Certainly this year, I've seen lots of material in the press about what that means, how you implement a zero trust, how far can you go before that starts to, I guess, impact on process and impact on your workforce's ability to work, I guess, efficiently. The zero trust, I guess, in one part of the spectrum can be locking your networks down so they're literally impenetrable, but of course then they aren't usable. What I would say is Microsoft 365 and Outlook is still a focus for threat actors. I still see that as a core, mostly because it's a core business process, and certainly a core application which every business is using. So of course it would become a threat vector. What I would say is, again, pay more attention to that. Pay more attention to how you're attaching security to your email clients. Again, add in your security applications, absolutely. Add in your training and your awareness for your workforce, and together that kind of creates a zero trust environment. Next year, I think, excuse me, we'll pass through probably a period where we certainly put more zero trust in place, and for each business, I would argue that it's kind of best spoke to you. Have a think about what that means, because zero trust is certainly certain components, multi-factor authentication, for instance. But I believe that for zero trust, it has to be tailored for your business. Have a good look at really where your threat vectors are. Where are the weak spots in your network? How are you handling security culture? That will then inform what zero trust really means for you. Now, many of you, of course, will also be looking at the tools. Everyone is trying to attach some kind of automation to their zero trust and also to their general digital security. It's kind of one of those aspects which I see in various other areas of business, and that's been developing for the last couple of years, really, within cybersecurity. One of the important things, I guess, the interesting developments will certainly be within AI. And really, what we mean by that is machine learning. We give an umbrella term of AI, but really it's machine learning. How can machine learning be attached to zero trust? How can machine learning be attached to really all of your systems to watch fly? How can that actually be done? Now, what I would argue is that zero trust and machine learning can absolutely be connected together. Again, what I would say, as I said earlier, is look at how you do that within your business. Have a look at what that means for your individual enterprise, your organization, because each business is different. Don't believe that you can buy a machine learning security off the shelf. The system or the application may be bought that way from a vendor, but it has to be integrated into your general security landscape. That's absolutely vital. So I would say that you kind of have to go that extra mile and create systems which are bespoke for you. Take all of those elements, and what you create at the end is a secure environment for your network, and a secure environment for all of your workers. That's kind of the end game. As I said, zero trust, it's kind of going the extra mile. It's kind of looking at where you go to next. What I would say is for most enterprises, things like EDR really will mitigate ransomware attacks. It certainly will. I think if you have a secure environment, which is bespoke for you, you're using maybe some new tools, machine learning, absolutely. But you're also adding on, I guess, an environment or creating an ecosystem of digital security within your business. That's the end game. What I would say with multi-factor, privilege access, and also monitoring and analysts, please don't feel that security in 2022 is set it up and forget it. It certainly is not. It's not that. Security is an evolving thing which moves forward. Threat factors change, so therefore your security must change as well. Again, I would use the analogy of education and training. We all need to learn new skills as new tools come along, and it's the same with security. You must evolve that forward over time. So please put in place clear monitoring. Do the analysis on a regular basis. Have a look at what's happening on your systems. Do some auditing on a regular basis, and that will highlight the weak spots within your network, but also it will highlight what you're doing very well. But the weak spots, of course, then can be addressed. But if you do not analyze that, if you do not do an audit, you will not be able to identify those issues. So I would really encourage everyone to put that in place. Put that as part of your strategic planning for next year, to do regular security audits. Have a look at the tools that you're using. Have a look at the education you're giving to your workforce. Have a look at the threats that have come in. Have they changed? All the threat actors really that are trying to penetrate your business, have they changed? Have they changed track? Have they changed their modus operandi? How are they doing it? Because if you can't see it, you can't fix it. If you can't see it, you can't protect yourself. So please, next year, as an absolute trend within your business, look at security as an ongoing evolution. I'd like to point out a couple of other things. I've also been tracking how, I guess, the use of technology is also expanding. We often, across Silicon UK, we speak a lot about some emerging technologies, things like quantum computing. That's a ways off yet. I would say more realistically, we're talking about sort of IoT, absolutely. Now, IoT is absolutely an expanding landscape. But of course, as it expands at the speed it is, it's also becoming a worrying threat landscape as well. The new regulations are coming, of course. The EU Cyber Resilience Act will be with us, which introduces mandatory cybersecurity requirements for products sold within the region. Because the UK, after Brexit, that may not apply. So I would argue that for businesses in the UK, you kind of have to pay attention to that yourself. The regulation may move into UK legislation as well, but that's not guaranteed. What I would say, have a good look at how your business is using that. They should focus on really how connected devices and what your cyber practice is by establishing an updated related information, how security support policies and procedures, how they connect to any kind of IoT services and devices your business is using. There are clear vulnerabilities there, which you really must respond to next year. I see IoT expanding massively across different market sectors and certainly across different industries. And of course, that will attract the requisite number of threat actors as well. What I would argue, again, if you're using any kind of IoT systems or devices, it's vital that you pay attention to security. Again, connect that with your security policy, connect that with how you are deploying these systems and how they're connected to your networks, particularly any kind of sensitive information. Microsoft's new report outlining cybersecurity risks globally show that IoT devices are a major risk, and sort of hackers will pay attention to those. So please, if you are in that space, please do pay attention to that. So I see that as absolutely as a growing threat vector. Of course, the affordability of IoT devices make them very popular for smaller enterprises. That's something else I've been seeing over the last year or so, that lots of threat actors are looking at smaller businesses. The corporates are still being attacked, but of course smaller businesses offer potentially an easier access. But of course smaller businesses are also embracing some new technologies. IoT is an example of that. So if you are in a small business and you are in that space, don't feel that your business is too small to be paid attention to, because it is not. A threat actor will look at every business as an endpoint for them. So please don't think that your business is too small to be noticed by hackers or by other malicious access, because it is absolutely not the case. And lastly, I'd say malware. Again, it targets mass IoT devices. It can also target individual devices as well. So again, look at how you're connecting IoT devices to your network, and that's the threat landscape that you need to pay attention to, not the device itself per se, really what it connects to, and again, how that ecosystem is developing. I'd like to finish by, I guess, reiterating, training and education. I really can't stress that strongly enough. We can all buy security systems from various vendors, and absolutely those are part of your security solution. What I would argue is your people are maybe not as important, but they are part of the landscape of strong, resilient security, which your business can develop. Yeah, cybersecurity threats are becoming more common each year. It's an absolute given, and businesses are increasingly spending larger percents of their time on IT budgets. Of course they are, as they upgrade their security and training. But there is a growing move towards more training that is not simply how to use a tool or how to pay attention to a potentially malicious email or an attachment. It's to have a greater awareness of phishing, of spoof scams, improving password strength, again, looking at the cyber health of your business, your network, and also how you, I guess, improve the health of your workforce in that context. I see that as a core part of protecting your business next year from cyber attack. One thing you could look at, for instance, with the Mimecast awareness training, I was looking at that the other day. You can measure how you are, I guess, performing against those metrics, as I said earlier. Please do measure how you are performing with security. What's happening within your network? It's an absolutely important thing to do, and that speaks volumes, and also swings back to IoT, to the threat landscape, to how your business is defending itself against specifically targeted attacks. Because that's, I guess, the final thing to pay attention to, is that the threat landscape may appear to be massive, but try and look at the threat landscape as something that your business is a part of, and you may be potentially targeted for various kinds of attacks. So be prepared for those. Look at what you're doing at the moment, because if you can't see your current security status, How can you possibly evolve that forward to be stronger? So please do that. And again, pay attention to what training you're actually giving to your people, because I feel that going forward, we do need to fix weak passwords. We need to fix how people are accessing networks. We need to look at that. Look at zero trust. Look at how we're using multi-factor. But don't make these accessible points too draconian, because if they are too complex, they will not be used. If they're too complex, your workforce will find a way around them. So please have them on board when you're designing these security policies. It's not something that can be communicated to them. They have to come along the journey with you. And if they come along on the journey with you, you will find that the security culture in your business will increase. You'll find that the threat parameters will be expanded if it needs to be, but also made more detailed just for your business. As I said, bespoke security for your business. And generally, pay attention to, I guess, what's happening, I guess, globally, how things are shifting. What is happening with ransomware attacks, with malware. The more you know, the more you can protect your business. In this session, we're actually going to look at something which is slightly different. We often talk about cybersecurity tools. We often talk about how to secure assets, but how do you secure, I guess, the human asset in your business? And how do you actually do that within a cybersecurity framework? So today we're going to be speaking to an expert in that, and we're going to kind of unpack what it means to be a cybersecurity culture within your business. How do you build that? What is it, and how do you define that within your business? What does it mean to have a culture of cybersecurity? Now, today, I'm delighted to be joined by Jelle Wieringa, a security awareness advocate, EMEA for Know4B. Welcome, Jelle.
Good morning.
Well, thanks for joining us on this session. As I just mentioned, often we talk about tools, don't we? We talk about cybersecurity, I guess, from almost like a vendor's perspective. What do I need to buy to secure my network? Whatever that can mean. It could mean your servers, it could mean remote workers. What does that mean? But this session, I think, is very interesting, because we are going to try and, I guess, understand what a cybersecurity culture looks like. What does that mean for businesses? Because I feel that's an absolutely essential component. Yes, you can build a robust cybersecurity system, with tools, etc., and other elements. But what about your people? What about that human element in your business, which often, unfortunately, is your weakest link? It really is. We often don't want to talk about that, but it kind of is. But how do you move from, I guess, maybe a weak cybersecurity culture to a strong cybersecurity culture? That's kind of what we're trying to, I guess, understand today. Now, before, of course, you have a track record, and guess in both camps. You look at tools, you look at how you could secure actual systems. Very interestingly, and I guess why you're in the chair today, Jelle, is how do you do that from a cultural perspective? So I think our session today will be, I think, quite an interesting one, because it's quite unusual. Now, I believe you have some slides to show us, which we're going to sort of talk about during this session. But just to sort of kick us off, when you are speaking to Know4B's customer base, is cybersecurity culture, is that front of mind? Is it on the agenda? Is the board even thinking about that?
Well, to be honest, it depends on where you are in the world, right? So,
okay,
security maturity is different in different regions. But if we look at here in Europe, I think the security maturity is really high. So what you get is organizations that go through the paces in order to secure their organization and reduce risk. They start, and you're absolutely right, they tend to start with technology first. It's binary, right? It's zeros and ones. It's easy to do. Spend some money, put it in there, implement it, maintain it, you're done. Then they move on to your processes, and finally they come to the point where they go, like, hey, we need the people element. We need the security, because you're absolutely right. 70 to 90% of all successful cyber attacks start with people. We're actually the biggest risk factor for organizations today. So what we see is that those organizations that are mature enough, they are looking for the next thing. They've done technology, people, processes. What's next? And that's combining them all. And that's where security culture actually comes in. It's how do you combine all of the elements there? How do you create something where actually your organization is striving for security and understanding security from within, from itself, without external motivators and external drivers, but intrinsically?
I think that's absolutely right. It seems to me to be it's certainly an educational aspect to that, certainly a training aspect. But it's how do you communicate that across your workforce? How do you shift from maybe what's a weak culture of cybersecurity to a stronger one? How do you shift behavior? Because that's kind of what we're talking about. How do you do that? How do you move, I guess, the needle even a little bit? Because that's what we're talking about. If you can instill in your workforce a higher level of awareness with cybersecurity, that's a win. Absolutely. Even a small shift in the needle gives you infinitely more protection than you had if you weren't doing this kind of education and training.
Definitely true. Definitely true. So how about we just run through some slides that I have,
Absolutely.
and then we go and talk through it, because I think that's the easiest way to do it. You normally use a slide deck for this. Hang on, give me 2 seconds and there we go.
Yep.
So you should be able to see my screen right now.
Indeed.
There we go. We'll skip this page because we already know we're talking about building a successful security culture.
That's what we're for.
I'll just, for those that don't know before,
I'll
just tell them we've been doing this for over a decade. We focus on the human element of cybersecurity. Yep. We are a cybersecurity technology player, as in we offer SaaS solutions, security as a service solutions. We have our training platform. We have our security coach platform, which actually in real time reduces risky behavior.
Indeed.
But what we mostly do, and what my job at KnowBe4 is to talk about why we need to secure that human factor and how we can do that. So that is a little bit about us. This is the people element again, right? We combat social engineering, the act or the art of manipulating humans. And what we do is we try to combine, or when we talk about what we do, we talk about three things. Like you already said, the first one is awareness. You do that through training, security awareness training. You do that by providing knowledge to people, and you hope that in the end, people stop having risky or doing risky behavior.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is, and that's the behavior element that you get into, how do you actually get from teaching people and giving them knowledge, inspiring them on the one hand, to actually applying that in real life? Because right, if you might understand what a phishing email does, and you can maybe detect it, and you know how to not react, but are you actually doing that in real life? Because there's a difference between me teaching you something, and most of the time that you might be aware, but that doesn't mean that you care.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? So how do we make you care? And that's when we get to the culture part. Culture is an intrinsic part of security. It should be. So we've got the ABCs. And if you combine those ABCs, awareness, behavior, and culture, then we come to something called security culture.
Indeed.
Now, that's what we're going to talk about today.
That's right. And that's an interesting perspective, isn't it? Because ultimately, it is that. It's a change in, I guess, people's absolutely awareness. It's also a change in, I guess, how they view security. Because often when I speak to some business leaders, their staff think, well, security is the IT department. That's not me. I don't need to pay attention to that. But you absolutely do, because IT cannot do anything to combat you opening an interesting attachment or going to a URL which you really shouldn't have done. These kind of simple actions, IT can't police that. They can't do anything about that. That's your action as a human being looking at something and making a decision. So kind of the ABCs, it's really to change that decision making, to think, hang on a second, pause. I've had the training. I'm a little bit more cyber aware. So should I really be looking at that URL? Should I really be opening that attachment? Just getting people to pause, because it's not an IT issue. It's a people issue.
It is. Well, people issue. It's something where people can actually help IT and help their organization to become better. Because some people talk about people are the weakest link in security. I don't like that phrase. I think we are the most vulnerable ones. And like any vulnerability, it can be patched. And patching people in this case is done through making them more aware and providing them with the tools, enabling them to act accordingly, to act in a secure manner. And in the end, what we want to do is we want to turn employees into sentinels. Sentinels for your organization. You want them to help and respond to a cybersecurity incident.
That is really interesting, because I've just written on my pad, fault. Let's not have a fault culture. Let's not have a blame culture. Let's not do that, because you say, we always say, oh, people are the weakest link and it's their fault for whatever attack happened to our businesses, and we're blaming them. The blame culture. We really need to move away from the blame culture. It's yes, they did something they maybe shouldn't have, but let's not call that a fault. Let's move away from the blame culture, because that creates negative connotations in people's heads. It's my fault. I created that issue. I think that's absolutely true, that you need to move away. Stop using phrases like weakest links and blame and faults, because that kind of doesn't get you anywhere. That certainly doesn't move you to a decent and, I guess, a strong cybersecurity culture, does it?
Now, who's ever been inspired by negativity?
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. If you want to motivate people, and in the end, a large part of what you need to do when you're combining awareness, behavior, and culture into a security culture, is be positive, because you need the people to latch on to the ideas that you have. And you can't do that if you can't motivate them. And motivation is a tricky thing. It's very hard to make somebody motivated, to get somebody motivated. It's very easy for them to lose that motivation again. And once it's gone, it's extremely hard for you as an organization, as a security practitioner, to get that back. So motivation is precious. That's one of the reasons why I hate fear, uncertainty, and doubt in our industry. The minute we have to use FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, in order to sell our products, in order to help organizations, is the minute we kind of lost already.
Because you end up being kind of adversarial then, and that's not really a useful, I guess, point of view. That's not a useful mindset if it's just an adversarial thing. That it's combat. Again, it's in the same box as the idea of blame and the idea of faults. That adversarial, I guess, approach. It kind of doesn't work today. Really, it's kind of hammer to crack a nut. It's you need to be more holistic than that. I guess need to be more aware of how the security landscape's changed and how people fit into that.
And the one thing that I noticed about that negative approach is CISOs and security professionals today understand very well that doesn't work. But now we have to move from that point of awareness as security practitioners into how can we make the organization understand? How can we make HR understand? Finance, the board, how can we all make them understand the same thing, that we need to approach this from a positive perspective? And that's where communication comes in, one of the most important aspects of cybersecurity today.
Well, interestingly, I do want to touch on HR, how we deliver this later on, I think, as we go through the slide deck. So I think that's an important one. Who's going to be the spearhead for this? Who's going to be the advocates for this changing culture? And HR is an interesting conversation, which I think we'll cover as we get through the slides.
So now we know that you need to combine awareness, behavior, and culture to get security culture, but that can still be very vague to people, especially if you're not in security. So what we tend to do is we like to have a definition in place, because lots of inconsistent messaging, that creates confusion. So having that one definition makes it clear to everyone what we're talking about. So the right definition here that we use is, so security culture is defined as the ideas, the customs, and the social behaviors that impact the security of an organization. Right? Just very simply put, ideas, customs, and social behaviors is what we're looking at. If you combine those and you can motivate those and you can engage those, then you have a security culture. Now, every organization has a culture. Actually, you have multiple cultures. You have a company culture, right? Company culture being where you as an organization put your vision, your plans, who you want to be, your identity, etc. And when I talk about security culture and how it relates to company culture, I usually go about it by going like, look at company culture as being a big book. That's who you want to be. That tells you the narrative of the story. And then security culture is a chapter within that book. It lives within that story, and it follows the narrative of that story, but it has its own focus, its own expertise within that. So
that's a very interesting way of putting it, because I often find that the businesses are focused on culture. That's an important part of who we are. It defines our business, but also it's kind of the glue which keeps it binds our workforce together. That's that kind of thing. But then when we start to talk about security, and we touch on who's going to, I guess, kind of deliver that, and who's going to define that behavior. That's always an interesting one in the mix. How do you look at your business strategically? Often you'll do that with process. You'll do that then with how does that manifest as our culture? But as you say, what happens then when you get to that chapter and we start talking about security? How does that often, in your view, change the overall culture of the business, or is it just an element of an existing culture that doesn't change? It's just an extra element of an existing culture. Does culture change when we start thinking about security?
It should, and that's the thing. We're at the stage now within cybersecurity where the word is it should. We're not there yet.
Okay,
and that's why we're talking about this today, right? Because
absolutely.
A lot of CISOs want to have cybersecurity be an integral part of the business to enable the business to go quicker, move forward, make more money, etc., etc. We're all striving for cybersecurity to become an enabler, and security culture is a tool to do that.
Indeed, yeah.
In itself, it doesn't do that.
Yeah, it's not a bolt-on. It's not something.
It's not a silver bullet there, but
you don't buy this off a shelf and bolt it onto your culture. That's not the approach. It's holistic. It's integrated. It's part of, I guess, the fabric of what your business is. But I think you're right. It's something that I think the awareness is higher. Absolutely. I think if we had this conversation a few years ago, no one would have a clue what cybersecurity culture would even be. What's that? Do we buy it? What is it? How do we create it? A few years later, we're having these conversations. And it's kind of off the back of how businesses have changed generally. They've become more interested in supporting their workforces, particularly well-being and certainly mental health, absolutely. And as a byproduct of that, culture has kind of become kind of top of the agenda almost, because they can see how looking after their people is valuable. And then the next stage is, okay, that's fine. But then let's look at, I guess, the practical aspects. Let's look at how we do things like security. And interestingly, then you have conversations about security in a framework of culture, which we would never even had 3 or 4 years ago. It would never even been on the agenda. We wouldn't have had this conversation because it didn't exist.
Well, the ironic thing here is actually that if we look at things from a different angle, if we look at culture from a different angle, those couple of years ago when nobody was talking about it, that doesn't mean that security culture or culture in general wasn't there. Every organization has a culture. Whether you are aware of it and working on it or not, you do have it. It's the same with company culture, just as it is with security culture. The thing, though, is that if you are not aware and if you're not actively addressing it, are you getting the culture that you want and the culture that you need? Yeah. So today, I think we've matured enough to figure out that, hang on, we need to address this in order for it to not spiral out of control or turn into something that we do not want. And security is such an important topic. Security culture is something that every organization, whether you're small, whether you're big, it doesn't matter what you do or who you are, you need to start addressing it. That's, I think, also what the industry is seeing, and that's why a lot of people are starting to talk about it.
Absolutely, sure.
So let's we now have the definition, right? That's still to some people a bit vague. So I usually add another slide to it.
Okay.
And that next slide is this one.
Okay.
If I want to explain really simple in really simple terms what a security culture is, it's think about you walking down a corridor all alone. There's nobody else in the building, and you see a piece of paper lying on the floor in front of you. Are you going to pick up that piece of paper and throw it in the bin, even though nobody will see you're doing it? Are you going to showcase that right behavior?
Yep.
Without any reward, without any incentive other than your own? That is what a security culture wants to inspire to. It wants people to not do things because they have to do it because somebody else told them to. No, you want people to showcase the right security behavior because they're intrinsically motivated. They motivate themselves to do it because they understand the value of it.
Do you often find that it depends who you are? Do you often have conversations with businesses? And we've looked at, and we with the help of HR, some people just are innately, I guess, more cybersecurity aware than others. Now, clearly, everyone isn't the same. Everyone's different. Everyone's different. Different approaches, different mindsets, different, even different values. Do you often find that there's a sliding scale of security culture within a business? Some people will have a massively good, and we don't need to train them at all. They are innately aware of security as we understand it. But unfortunately, the other side of the other end of the spectrum, these kind of people need more help with that. Do you find that kind of level of different, because people are different, so it can't be maybe one piece of training fits everyone. For instance, you need to be aware of what level, I guess, of awareness is in your business, and understand who your people are and kind of what their perspective is.
Yeah. So the way I look at that is, from a security culture perspective, it's an 80-20 rule, right? You can do, you can build a security, you can design and build a security culture that will fit 80% of the people you have in your organization.
Sure.
Those last 20%, well, you need to kind of address them personally or individually, and you need to tune your security culture and the actions that you do to get that security culture. Fine tune it to their personality. You got to individualize it and tailor it. And that's where the extra 20% comes from. And that's the same with the cost of building a security culture, right?
Yeah.
80% of the cost, easy. For 80%, that cost is relatively low. That last 20%, that's where, devil's in the details, right? That's where you're going to spend your extra money. The thing is that you want, and that's the beauty of security culture, it is not just you as a security practitioner that wants to push a good security culture on those individuals. We're making people care shouldn't just be the task of HR or IT, or it's a common goal for everyone.
Yeah.
Not just the departments and the department head and the managers. It's also your near colleague, right? Your direct colleague that has to inspire you to do the right thing. It is a community effort. Almost.
Yes, I wrote community on my pad early on because that's kind of what it is. We are shifting the conversation to use words like community, which you would never use in the same sentence as cybersecurity a few years ago. You just wouldn't. So what does that mean? What does cybersecurity community look like? Well, it's kind of what we're talking about. It's interesting that that kind of last 20% maybe could cause you some issues, but it's absolutely addressable. Mostly because you can kind of identify who those people are. We have systems these days where we can track incidents, etc. And we can say, well, why does David's email seem to get hit a lot? What's happening there? Why is he getting a disproportionate number of his security hits? Why is that? Maybe we need to pay attention to what David's doing, or more importantly, what he isn't doing from a security point of view, and pay attention to that. So it's not a case of that 20% is kind of the Achilles heel of your business. It's not, because you can identify what's kind of happening there and pay attention to that. Luckily we have intelligence systems these days. We can watch that and kind of alert you to, well, something happening over there. Maybe you need to pay attention to that and go and look at that in more detail. And that's gold dust when we're talking about building community and culture, because then you can focus on maybe a group of people, a team, or even an individual, as you said, that maybe needs a little bit of help. just to get them to the mindset where those incidents are reduced or even eradicated altogether. That's the ultimate goal, of course.
Yeah, and I think the word help here is very significant, right? You want to help those people, you want to enable them. And again, you don't want to punish them. That's
no punishment. It's not blame. It's not a blame culture. Absolutely not.
So in order to make people, the individual, understand what their role is, I sometimes refer back to this. This is a quote by one of my colleagues, Perry Carpenter.
Yep.
He says that, well, security culture basically goes beyond awareness and coercing secure behavior. That's the thing, how most individuals, most users look at security like, I have to do awareness training, and I'm being coerced into secure behavior. Yeah. Why would I want to? I don't get it. Now, it's all about making your workers value security, where you proactively participate in taking steps to reduce risk. That is the goal.
Yeah.
It is onboarding them to the idea and the value of security. So,
well, I think also, I also write on my pad advocates and advocacy, which is kind of what you just mentioned. You said, well, what's happening to is my colleague next door to me? Is that person as security aware as I am? That idea of a sort of group mind of security. But clearly, from a training and a behavioural point of view, yes. Find some advocates in your business, people that understand this, and then they can communicate that, because then it's not a directive, as you say. It's not something that, say, HR is forcing me to do. If you can create that kind of culture in your business where there's advocates for stronger security, then it's kind of an easy win, because you're allowing your, more aware colleagues to kind of influence your behavior. And often that will be really subconsciously. It really will be, because they haven't ultimately sat in a room somewhere and given some training. It's kind of the culture's almost moved to those people by osmosis almost. They've absorbed it, which is interesting. And then you get this culture of security kind of blossoming on its own, which is amazing to watch.
So basically the way I look at it, you want to create those advocates, those teams, people within different teams that can motivate their teams as well and their colleagues. But you also want to support them continuously. You want to maintain them. That's very important, because if you don't, they'll go away.
Yeah.
And that's not what you want, because once you have those advocates, you're not alone anymore.
Indeed.
That's the beauty of it, right?
Indeed.
It's creating basically that army of people that believe in the same thing and strive for the same thing. So that's where that comes in. And then slowly, I like the term osmosis, you slowly kind of change the organization. That's the thing with security culture. It is not a revolution. It's an evolution.
Indeed.
It is something that takes years to do. And you got to realize that's the case. So don't rush it. Now, just to clarify, we've got behaviors, we've got awareness, so knowledge part. And we also talk about values, because those three components are generally what you do when you start your security awareness campaigns. But then where security culture kicks in is where you have pressure coming, social pressure coming in from other people influencing their colleagues. That's where the advocates come in. That's where people come in and go like, hey, hang on, what you're doing here is not right. Maybe you should do this. It's influencing in themselves and others. It's the group dynamic where it comes in. And this is where HR also comes in. Because if you look at group dynamics and you want to motivate an entire group and you want to basically cultivate the dynamics within that group, that's something that HR does very well.
Indeed.
It's their job, it's their role. It's how can you motivate an entire organization, the departments within the organization, the groups within the organization, how can you move them from A to B?
Yeah, and I find that fascinating that we're now talking about cybersecurity and culture in the same sentence as HR. That would never even been on their radar a few years ago. But that's kind of a measure of how businesses have, become more integrated. They've understood that the role of HR, for instance, has changed. Now it is part of really the entire business. And security is absolutely part of their role these days.
Yeah, and one of the reasons, by the way, is as an HR department, you are there to make sure that the employee feels safe. He can do his job properly to the best of his efforts. And what we see today happening, especially if you look at it's really hard to get good staff nowadays, right? They're simply not there. And if you get them, well, are they the right fit, etc.? It really is hard to do. So employee retention, which has always been on the radar of HR, now can be influenced by cybersecurity, because what we see happening in the field is that people that are victimized of a cyber attack, the victim of a cyber attack, because they clicked that email unknowingly, or because they were the ones that let ransomware into the organization.
Indeed.
Well, there's a large part of shame there and a large part of frustration there, which often makes them leave the organization. And as an organization, if they are a valued employee, you don't want to lose that knowledge and that expertise. And that, again, is the job of HR. So HR and cybersecurity, especially nowadays, are being linked together, are being forced together and to work together. So that's actually, and I think that's a really good thing. Then we move on to context. Right? So we had social pressures, we had group dynamics, and then we have context. And then another department enters the game, and that's marketing. Because marketing, what are they good at? Communicating. And cybersecurity today, for the large part, is about communicating the value of it. That's how you get people on board. And as a security practitioner, well, let's face it, we're good at technology, we're good at security.
Yeah.
We're not necessarily good at communicating.
Sure.
So why not, just like we get in the help of HR, get into help of marketing with the PR departments, help them frame the messaging, help them build our audience and basically get our audience on board. So with this, within security culture, my first tip would be, look outside of your own security department for help. Go combine your forces with HR, with marketing, and if you can, with the board, because if they're the best amplifier of your message.
Sure.
So do that, combine all of these things together, and we're talking security culture. Now, if we take that one step down, if I may, because I think this is a really interesting slide. If you look at the aspects of security culture, how do we break that down? Well, there's 7 aspects. We've got attitudes, behaviors, cognition, we've got communication, compliance, norms, and responsibilities. We won't go into all of them, but one of the most important ones is attitudes, right? How employees are feeling and what their feelings and beliefs about security protocols and issues are. That's where people either care or don't care. And that's where you can have a really big impact. And that leads to things like cognition. How do employees actually understand the knowledge and the awareness that you're giving them of security issues and activities that you do as an organization? Again, big on communication. Now, if you have these 7 behaviors, if you know that security culture is built up out of these, you can actually start measuring security culture.
That was something that I absolutely wanted to touch on, and because I think the previous slide, for instance, when you look at attitude, you look at communication, particularly attitude. Is that something that you can measure? Can you do that? Can you look at where are we today? Because I always feel that if you can't see it, you can't fix it. And that's all about data. That's all about looking at your business. How secure are we? What is our cybersecurity awareness like today? Can we give ourselves a benchmark? So at least we know where we are today, and then we know where we want to go. We know what our goal is. But if you don't know where you are today, what level you're at, or what the level of awareness is, how can you get to your goal? So I think measurement early on is an absolute. I think if anything, you communicate that today is that to measure where you are, look at the data, because if you don't have that information, you simply cannot build the culture that you want to.
So you measure this through something called a security culture survey. And the reason we use a survey is because we simply ask people how they feel about those 7 items. And the reason we do that is because a lot of security boils down to the emotion of the user. Well, how does he feel about it, right? But we need hard data, just like you said. That's where surveys comes in. Surveys allow you to get from emotion to data. And if you do that, and you do that a couple of times a year, and it's a survey that only takes a couple of minutes for you. Right? It's not a hard thing to do. So that security culture survey, if you implement it, we've done that across all of our customers. And you get the graph, which you see right now in the screen. every dot is a customer organization. And we've looked at that, and then we decided we need certain levels in security culture, going from level 1 to level 5. Level 5 being the utopia. That's where we want to get to. But it's also very hard to do. So what we see is, well, there's plenty of work left for us in the industry and left for organizations to do, because most organizations today are in level 3, where they have a programmatic approach to security awareness and behavior. That's where we are today, realistically. And this is measured over all of our, what we have over 50,000 organizations that we can measure this for. So it's a lot of dots if you look at it.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
But how do we get to that next step? And that's what I want to talk about next, if I can. Sure. So we've got, first of all, the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you understand where you are today, because you can't go from level 1 to level 5 instantly. You need to go through all of the steps. It's a program, so you know. So what are you trying to achieve? Where do you want to end up? Do you actually want to have that security culture and shape it? Or are you, for now, for this year, for the coming year, happy to just focus on behavior? Or just, are you still setting up your security awareness? Be realistic about that. And once you're realistic about that, then you move on and you go to, hang on, okay, so I know where I want to end up, but how does that really look like? What behaviors do benefit our organization? What should people do and not do in our organization?
Absolutely.
That tends to differ from organization to organization.
Yeah.
The second thing is, you can't do it all at once. So we usually tell people to, hang on, create small little chunks, bite-sized chunks, which you're actually able to bite off. So choose 2 or 3 behaviors and do that at one time. And the time period I usually advise organizations is 6 months.
Okay. Yeah.
Focus on 2 or 3 of them for 6 months at a time, then move on to the next one. You'll see that it'll actually go pretty quickly, because 6 months for 3 behavioral changes is good. If you can change 3 things in your organization, you're doing well. And the last one is, so I, as a security department, might be able to do this, and our board might think we were able to do this.
Yeah.
But realistically, is the organization, and let's not forget our third-party suppliers, because you need to influence them too. Because if you don't, your organization might be doing very well and have a really successful security culture, but the people you work with that have a direct impact on your business might still have, well, a less desirable one.
Let's call it that. Yeah. So let's be kind. Yeah.
Yeah. So you need to make sure that you include everyone. So these 3 steps are actually, after you've decided where you want to go, what you want to do next. Now, yeah, go right ahead if you want to say something.
It's that integrated approach, isn't it? Because culture, I guess culture can often be viewed as quite insular. It's just what we do as a business. It's our culture. But security, yes, it exists within your business as, I guess, as a finite thing. But it isn't that. It's an integrated approach, and as you say, that's outside your organization. That's everybody within your supply chain. Think about all your logistics, everyone that connects to your business. Really needs to be factored in there. So it's that integrated approach. You know, don't be too blinkered. It's not just us. No, it's not. It may be initially, but then you widen your view, and then the culture then spreads to your suppliers. And you say, if you can then directly influence your logistics chain, everyone becomes more secure then.
Yep. And that's why you want to approach this from a program perspective, because you need to make sure that everybody understands and is able to see what is expected of them and how they can get there. And that's the thing I see being done wrong in most organizations. Is they tackle security culture as a initiative. Let's do it. Let's get this going, and then we forget about it. And in the beginning of this talk, you were talking about who should own this, right? And security should own it. Definitely, your CISO should own security culture, but that doesn't mean that he has to do it alone again, right? Think about the
absolutely. That's right.
Now, there's a couple of things you can actually do, that practical ways that you can grow your security culture, that you can actually actively shape it. So when we talk about this, there's plenty more that you can do, but these 5 are like the ones that are doable today.
Yeah.
We've already talked about including everyone, right? That means that even those people that don't care about security, you still need to try and include them in some way. Do not forget about them, because if you do, you're lost. It's all or nothing. The second thing that you want to do is, in order to include everyone, you need to make it relatable and accessible. Often, way too often, security guys or IT guys talk about things in a technology sense, or in a way that people don't understand it. We've got our own jargon, right? Our own language.
Indeed.
And that's not what you want to do if you want to include people. So make it easy, make it simple to understand, and make it in their language. It's like talking to the board. The board understands risk. Do not talk about threats, talk about risks.
Indeed.
It's just making sure you understand your audience. Then one of the things you want to do is you want to offer continuous security awareness and training. And what I mean with that is you want to institute opportunities for employees to improve. Because doing training and completing training actually makes people masters within security.
Indeed.
And
Indeed.
If you look at it psychologically, a lot of us, actually most of us, are triggered by smaller victories more often. So what you want to do is you want to train people every month for 5 minutes to give them that sense of mastery.
Indeed.
In essence, if you look at it neuropsychologically, they get a little boost of dopamine, and we all love dopamine.
Indeed.
That's what happens. It's a little reward system that's being triggered.
Indeed.
And you want to do that continuously because it keeps them motivated. You want to do it in a fun way, in a relevant way. That's what you want to do there. And you want to communicate the results. Because if you don't know how well you're doing, you kind of lose interest.
Well, that's right. Absolutely.
And I'll skip the next one. I'll save that for last. But now we get to the rewards and the encouragement part, right? You want to recognize employees for their performance. You want to appreciate them, because appreciation is always the best motivator. It doesn't have to be money. You don't have to give people money after completing a course, because the only thing that does is that next time they are going to complete a course, they want more money and more money, and money becomes the incentivator, not their intrinsic incentive.
Indeed.
And that's not what you want. You don't want extrinsic incentives. And lastly, one of the, I think, pivotal ones is understand that however well you're trying to do your job as a security guy, however much energy you're spending on building a security culture, doing awareness, behavioral shaping, and culture building, there's always going to be shadow IT, meaning people are always going to look for ways to do their job outside of the boundaries that you give them, because sometimes the boundaries to them are restricted.
Sure. Indeed.
That's where shadow IT emerges. So embrace shadow IT, understand that it's there, and slowly try to look at it as a giant iceberg, and I have the ice pick. It's my job as a security guy to hammer away at that iceberg and make it smaller. Mm-hmm. So embrace shadow IT. Know it's there. Don't fight it, but work together with the organization to build security into their business processes in a way that works for them.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, and I think those 5 practical takeaways, if people can focus on that and use that as their core for looking at how they build a good cybersecurity culture within their business, they'll be on strong ground. They'll be on a good foundation to move that to their end goal. Well, Jelle, we've kind of run out of time. Unfortunately, I think we could probably talk about this for days, because it's fascinating. We could unpick all of that in more detail, but people may like to move to the obviously the next session on our cybersecurity day. Well, basically, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, Jelle. It's been, I think it's been fascinating. Really, how to develop a cybersecurity culture. It's one of those things that maybe was undefined a few years ago. It's just one of those. It's become literally top of the agenda for some businesses, as culture has kind of done that. It's an interesting evolution of how businesses now look at security in different contexts. Well, again, thanks again for joining us, Jelle. If you'd like to find out more, then please do visit knowbefore.com for lots more information about how you guys can help businesses on a practical level, even early days. If they just want to try and understand what cybersecurity culture is, I think you guys are really a point of contact for all of that. And also, of course, the practical elements of how you actually deliver that, how you build those kinds of, I guess, awareness, and even the practical aspect, courses and training, those kinds of things. So again, thanks everyone for joining us on this session, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. In this presentation, which I think is very timely, and also I think will be very engaging for everyone who's joined us today. I'm being joined by Rick Ferguson, the Vice President of Security Intelligence at Forescout Technologies. And we'll be covering digital security tools. We'll be looking at trends which we've identified, and also, of course, how you can combat some of the issues which Rick has identified. There'll be a presentation which we'll have a conversation as we go. But I think the actual interesting stuff that's going to come out of this is an indication of, I guess, where we are, and also what 2023 actually looks like as far as cybersecurity is concerned. So, welcome, Rick. Thanks for joining us today. I had a look at your sort of stack before we sort of speak today. It's an interesting mix, isn't it? You picked on some interesting topics, I think, as we move into 2023. And what that means for for security. It's quite a melting pot, which I was kind of hoping for. Because I think your company has a sort of depth of knowledge, doesn't it? You look at security from a number of different angles.
Yeah, I mean, so for Forescout, the thing that underlies everything, and actually most people watching this will probably know me from my previous employer, because I've only been at Forescout since August of this year.
Yeah.
And the thing that attracted me to to change employer, to change jobs, was the fact that the Forescout platform is built on this really all-encompassing foundation of visibility.
Yep.
Because security solution vendors traditionally have taken what was a security solution maybe aimed at endpoints originally, or whatever it might have been, and tried to bolt visibility onto that. What Forescout are doing is taking a visibility platform and building more and more security capability and functionality onto that visibility platform, because it's no longer just about, can I secure all of my Windows endpoints, or even can I secure all of my traditional endpoints? It's also, can I secure the stuff that's in my production line? Can I secure the stuff that's in my hospital? Can I secure the devices that people are bringing with them? And it's about being able to see, recognize, classify, assign risk scores to all of that, and then orchestrate and automate the security of that entire connected digital terrain.
Yes, absolutely. And it does. It always occurs to me that if you can't see it, you can't protect it. It's as simple as that. And that's about data. That's about visibility. That's about understanding kind of where you are on your journey and what that means for you. It's not a case of one size fits all, I don't think, anymore with security. It has to be bespoke to you. But that all comes back to analysts. It all comes back to, I guess, auditing where you are on your sort of security journey. And if you can, I guess, look at where you are and have that visibility, then you're going to be head and shoulders above everyone else, because you'll be able to see, I guess, where your weak spots are. And if you can see them, you can do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to figure out, what vulnerabilities you have within your ecosystem, whether internal or external facing, or what configuration issues, if you want to be able to certify compliance against whatever regulatory standards are relevant within your industry vertical, if you don't have that complete visibility, you're not going to be able to see the configuration issues, the vulnerability and patching issues, the communication issues. Maybe point A should not be allowed to communicate with point F through point C. And if you can't visualize those communication flows, those vulnerabilities, those misconfigurations, there's nothing you can do to ensure that they're secured. And there's nothing you can do actually to certify compliance against those requirements.
Absolutely. Well, I believe you have a presentation which we're going to sort of talk through. I think we'll, as we go, I think we'll have a conversation about the content as we move through the through the slides. But I'll hand it over to you, and we'll see where we go.
All right. So I called the presentation "The More Things Change" for two reasons. One, because I am my teenage years were the 1980s, and Cinderella are a fantastic rock band who had a song by that name. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And secondly, because it's so true. Whenever you see, or many times when you see a forward-looking threat presentation, there is the temptation to search for the extraordinary as a presenter. You want to be shocking and exciting, and you want to be able to say something net new. But the truth is, if we're looking 12 months ahead in the threat landscape, the net new, the black swan, is very, very rare. That's why it's a black swan.
Indeed.
And what we will see over the next 12 months are the consequences of the 12 months that we've just seen. And thus it has ever been and always will be. It's only when you get to stand back from a distance or project much further forwards than 12 months that you can actually start to say, wow, look at the societal impacts of these technologies.
Indeed.
Look at the opportunities that they present for threat actors. So really, if we're talking about the next 12 months, which we are, it really is a case of incremental changes over the things that we've seen over the course of 2022. So let's look at what some of those are. Ransomware is still huge, always feels like, anyway, always has been, feels like it always will be, but it is nevertheless. Say again?
It's not going away.
Oh no, it's not, but it is evolving. So it's still here, but it is evolving. The biggest ransomware in raw numbers terms that we saw over the course of 2022 was Lockbit. They had a successful attack in 2021 against Accenture, which has a whole story attached to it that maybe we shouldn't go into.
When we have more time.
Bridgestone were attacked this year.
Indeed.
And Lockbit version 3.0 was released in 2022. Some interesting things around 3.0. One of the things that the Lockbit group did was they actually had a bug bounty for the encryption decryption module. So they invited hackers to try and find problems because they wanted to be sure that nobody could build a decryptor for it. They wanted to protect their investment. So they had an ethical hacker bug bounty against the decryption code. One of the operators was arrested in November 22. But it was just an operator. It wasn't anyone senior in the gang. But what's significant for me about Lockbit this year is that the builder in September, the builder for Lockbit leaked online. So what was software that was reserved for a particular ransomware gang is now much more widely available. So next year, that highly capable code, we'll see that being used by more groups and more individuals.
Indeed.
Conti was a big name at the beginning of 2022. The biggest event in 22 for Conti was the attack on the Costa Rican government, which got loads of coverage, and they demanded this huge ransom, which I believe was never paid. But it seems that what that actually was really a bit of a mission to keep the lights on at Conti while they were busy disappearing. Just like REvil did, just like DarkSide did, Conti disappeared in 2022, but they learned some lessons from those previous disappearances. And what they did was they actually started to reappear before they disappeared because they were trying to hide the traces. Previously, it's really easy to see, oh, this group has disappeared and look, this new one has appeared, but there's all these similarities in code or in TTPs or whatever it might be. But we saw groups like Karakurt, Blackbuster, Blackbyte beginning to appear before Conti ever disappeared. So I think a lot of their final activities were false flags, were red herrings, keeping the lights on at Conti, making it look like they were still around. What has been, I think, significant for me around the new activity in ransomware, though, and this is really significant, is that we are finally beginning to see a significant number, and that number will grow, of ransomware threat actors not bothering with encryption. So that's a huge change, right? Obviously, the ransomware business model is based on encryption. I encrypt your stuff, you don't have access to it, and then I demand a ransom to decrypt it so you can have access again. Obviously, backups is your get out of jail free card for that, right? If you have good backups that are relatively recent, hopefully you can recover from the encryption by restoring from backup. Attack groups realized this. They applied secondary, tertiary, even quaternary, there's a word for you, leverage in the forms of different extortion methods. So the first extortion is denial of access to your data by encryption. The second extortion was threat to leak your data, which has become absolutely run of the mill now.
Yeah.
The third level of extortion was then layering on a DDoS on top of that. And the fourth, the quadruple extortion, if you like, was going through your data and beginning to contact customers or partners or whatever who were contained within your data to spread the good news. All of these basically are just leverage to get you to pay the ransom. The encryption part of it has become unnecessary. Not only is it unnecessary, it's prone to failure. It's difficult to manage. You've got to make sure that your encryption, decryption works. You've got to manage the individual keys for each victim, make sure that you're getting the right key to the right victim and that the decryption is going to work. And there's a lot of overhead, and there's a lot of code, and there's a lot of effort. Attackers have discovered that actually, if I can get in, steal your data, and then contact you and say, hey, I've got your data and I'm going to leak it, the encryption is irrelevant. Not only that, it's much more difficult to recover from. Backups won't help you in that situation.
No,
and that's where ransomware is
I see
going.
that a lot. I see the approach they're taking is very business-like. It's how can we make our business, which is creating this stuff and obviously hacking businesses, how can we make that into more of a business? I mean, ultimately, you're kind of talking about what's the low-hanging fruit in every scenario? How can we make this as easy as possible for us as a ransomware attackers? Which is an interesting way of approaching this kind of thing. And I think a lot of businesses don't appreciate the sophistication of some of these groups. So they are businesses, they are there to make money.
Yeah. I mean, you think about the way that a lot of businesses operate. One of the critical things in sort of forward planning for your business is about reducing friction. How do I reduce friction to get people to adopt my service or to make my route to market quicker and easier, whatever it is you do as a business? And doing away with the encryption part of it is reducing friction for the attacker. But it does mean that all the things, the main thing that we've learned, which is have good backups, isn't relevant anymore. It means that the ransomware attack is relying massively on stealth. It's not relying on a big bang and noise and a ransom note. It's relying on stealth. So the things that I think we'll see or should see being deployed much more widely, neither of them are particularly new, but they're still both massively under-deployed. The things we'll see being deployed in the coming 12 months and beyond, which are your new best friends in defending from ransomware, is encryption and network segmentation. You have to make your stuff difficult to get to and difficult to get out. That's network segmentation. And you have to make your stuff useless if someone does steal it. That's your own encryption. If the data that's exfiltrated is encrypted, then they can't leak it. If your network is properly segmented, hopefully they can't even get to it. But those are the new best friends for ransomware. And that's, for me, the big lesson about how it's changed recently.
And do you see the businesses that you talk to, are they taking that on board? Is that something that is on their strategic roadmaps? Is it something that they're paying more attention to? Or is that we kind of getting into that next year?
Like I said, neither of those technologies are particularly new, and they are both still massively under-deployed. People aren't doing this. People aren't encrypting. There's a historic, there's a hangover around encryption that people think that it's difficult. They're worried about, what if I can never decrypt? What if I denial of access myself to my own data? There's a lot of concern about a lack of skill, a lack of expertise, a lack of exposure, and a significant overhead to managing it. Actually, in a lot of the new encryption stuff, and I can say this without feeling commercial because we don't do encryption, a lot of the newer encryption stuff, searchable symmetric encryption, homomorphic encryption, these innovations in that space do make it significantly more easy to manage, and in some cases make it so that you actually never have to decrypt your data even when you're using it. So there's been some fantastic innovation in that space, but not widely adopted. Segmentation, the same. We've been talking in security circles for years about not having flat networks, but people still have flat networks. You've only got to look at some of the recent hacks. And we'll talk about a few of those, the big names like the Uber hack, IHG. A lot of that is facilitated by totally flat network structures.
Absolutely. I think, I'm sure I saw an email this morning. I think Uber's been hacked again, I believe. That's a kind of, look at those guys. You don't want to be those guys. And there are practical steps you can take to remedy that. Don't feel that you're powerless, because you absolutely are not.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's just one. I mean, that's just ransomware. The next area that I found interesting throughout this year is it's becoming known as identity-based attacks. And it's a funny one because it actually encompasses a lot of the things that we're very familiar with. Identity-based attacks encompasses phishing and all the variants of phishing, smishing, vishing, and all the other ishings. It encompasses things like credential stuffing, password spraying, things that we've seen emerging more strongly over 2022, things like paying your employees to give criminals or threat actors access to your infrastructure. That's become a little more widespread. So insider attacks is moving up the rankings a little bit, I think. SIM swapping is gaining traction still, the social engineering around SIM swapping. All of this feeding this industry of identity access brokers, identity access or initial access vendors, IAVs, IABs. These are criminals who don't actually break into your infrastructure and do stuff, ransomware, data theft, whatever. They simply sell access to other criminals to your infrastructure, initial access brokers. And all of these different identity-based attacks methodologies are feeding into this industry. One of the big newer ones that we've seen in 2022, which will become important in 2023 in terms of mitigating it, is MFA fatigue, multi-factor authentication fatigue. We saw this used against Microsoft, against Cisco, against Uber, against IHG. MFA fatigue in a nutshell is this. Most of the bigger enterprises use multi-factor authentication now. Many of them, the second factor is something that pops up a notification on your mobile device, for example. MFA fatigue will automate the bombarding of someone whose credentials they have, username and password, with pop-ups saying, hey, this login with your credentials has just happened. Was it you? Do you authorize it? 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 Over and over again. And that's the fatigue element, hoping that either the victim, the target, will just say, oh my God, yes, and let the person in. Or if not, the attacker will follow up with some very clever social engineering, either in the form of an email, but also in the form of a telephone call, pretending to be from the internal tech support of that person's employer, saying, hey, we can see you're having some trouble with logging in. I can see you're getting bombarded with pop-ups. That must be really annoying. You're going to see one more. I just need you to accept that one and we'll make the problem go away. Well, of course, the problem does go away because you just gave the attacker access to your infrastructure. So MFA fatigue's been big this year and it's been proven to be successful. And will be leveraged.
I always think that's an odd one because obviously it's in place for legitimate reasons. So you and I can shop without any issues or log on to our Microsoft 365, for instance. I think we've just started to do that. There are legitimate reasons for it. But of course, it's another door, isn't it, for threat actors?
And for me, it's a configuration thing as well. You know, with MFA, there are other things you can do than just have it pop up. Yes, it was me. No, it wasn't me. Box, and that's what I would recommend. What do we need to change to combat this? Well, if you're using these kind of pop-ups, make them number based. So instead of just pressing yes, it gives you a number that you then have to type in. So it's not just pressing a box. It complicates it slightly. It means that number has to get back to the attacker. Of course, good social engineering will still overcome that, but it adds complication. That's one thing. And also, if there's a large number of failed attempts within a short time frame, lock the account out. That's suspicious behavior. Don't just let that keep rolling. So little configuration changes can make a big difference.
Which is also what you were speaking about earlier, that idea that your security is an integrated whole. It's not just one thing. All these things have to be connected together, so they create this ecosystem of security within your business. It's not just one thing. Everything, like multi-factor, connects to something else, and it's kind of a cross-pollination. So everything cancels each other out, and it becomes a secure system then, because there's nowhere to go. Everything ends up in a cul-de-sac where you have to do something.
Or on the flip side, if you've done it wrong, and this unfortunately is stuff that we've seen this past 12 months, if you've done it wrong, it becomes this echo chamber of doom. So like one of the things that we've seen more than once this year, I'm thinking Uber and IHG, if I remember correctly, the attackers found clear text passwords stored in scripts and configuration files in shares that were accessible internally to far too many people. In the case of IHG, they found the clear text password, which was QWERTY123, by the way. The clear text password in a configuration script for their privileged account management tool. So, and this was the master password for the PAM tool. So having that master password means that they had access to everything. And it was in clear text, embedded in a configuration script, in a file share, accessible to the rest of the organization. Little mistakes can have significant, and actually we're going to talk about supply chain attacks in a moment. Little mistakes can have significantly amplified effects further down the chain. Almost as if I planned it, the supply chain attacks. 2021 had more boom in it than 2022 did in terms of supply chain attacks. SolarWinds, Kaseya being the big ones. Nonetheless, we still saw some significant supply chain breaches. The Okta breach, which was actually a breach of one further up the supply chain from Okta of one of their providers, Sitel, was a big event for them. We saw OAuth tokens that were stolen for GitHub, which gave attackers access to private repositories. And like I was just saying, inside some of those repositories were things like AWS API keys, for example. So that's the huge benefit from an attacker's perspective of intervening further up the supply chain, amplified consequences lower down. The Fishpig and AccessPress things, those are WordPress plugins, and it seems not even worth bothering saying that WordPress can present significant dangers to your enterprise, but it really can, and it's still there, and it's still an attractive attack target. The Fishpig thing was is a plugin for Magento online stores. The attackers managed to inject malware into the Fishpig software, and it gave them back-end access to every online store that was using that software. AccessPress is themes for WordPress. Again, malware injected into the themes and allowed attackers to have a web shell on any WordPress installation that was using those affected themes.
That's interesting. Is that changing? Because I'm reading and I'm seeing a great deal of movement, particularly in e-commerce. You're kind of away from, I guess, the traditional way of doing things. A lot of businesses are moving to marketplaces. They're cutting the head off the monolith. They're putting together interesting groups of technologies, microservices, APIs. All of that stuff just to move e-commerce, I guess, to a platform which is more flexible for them. But from a security perspective, if you just chop the head off the monolith, is that really going to do anything for your security?
It depends how distributed your supply chain is from a digital perspective, your software supply chain, and how well you manage that. What are your sandbox procedures, for example?
Well, that I'm just write sandbox on my pad, oddly enough, because that occurs to me that you can do all of that for, I guess, internal reasons, cost savings, efficiency gains, all of that, but you're still looking at your business in isolation. You still have to look back across your supply chain and then maybe the other way to your customer base. Again, it's an integrated thing. You can't do it in isolation.
We talk a lot about zero trust in the industry, and obviously there's a lot of misuse of the term zero trust in sales and marketing literature, and I think that clouds understanding of the issue. But if I were to try and in very few words characterize what zero trust is, in a form that you can mentally apply to everything that you do, it's eliminating trust from your security architecture. That's all it is. That's why it's called zero trust. Eliminate trust from your security architecture, wherever that trust exists. And if that trust exists between you and an up the chain software supplier, you can't afford that level of trust anymore. You can't simply accept what you're given from further up the chain. You have to do your own verification in one way or another of what it is that you're bringing into your business. There's a few lessons out of all of this, out of the supply chain attacks, out of the identity-based attacks. You've got to pay particular attention to privileged accounts. You've got to make sure that sensitive credentials aren't stored in clear text and embedded in clear text. So you've got to, again, make use of encryption, make sure that you're properly applying the principle of need to know and the principle of least privilege. Again, security fundamentals, but not really widely deployed. We have flat network infrastructure, and we don't particularly pay as much attention as we should to need to know and least privilege. That's why this stuff is available.
Do you see the security landscape then from an enterprise perspective? we kind of be the age that we've really passed through seems to me to be quite open. WordPress is a good example. It's a core piece of software which is very useful, and the ecosystem that generate has really grown up around it makes it very, very useful for various things.
Yeah.
But that openness, of course, is a security nightmare. It can be. Fishpig is a good example. So are we moving away from that? Are we moving to businesses are rebuilding security bunkers around their key services? Is that kind of where we have to go to try and mitigate the attack vectors?
I think on an enterprise level, certainly you see migration away from tools like WordPress. I've seen that in places where I have worked, and I've seen that in customers that I've spoken to.
Yeah.
But on an SMB level, not so much, because you want ease of configuration, ease of deployment, ease of use, familiarity. There's value in all of that as well.
Yeah. And
these are the companies that have less money and less time to worry about security. They don't have a security team; they have an IT team, and that's one person. Their IT team is the IT person, and they do security too. So those are the people, and that's what I mean with like the Magento online stores and back-end access to all of your commercial activity.
Yeah.
Those are SMB stores that you're not talking about larger enterprise stuff. They're softer targets in the same way that healthcare is a softer target for ransomware actors, and that's why despite promises and protestations to the contrary, ransomware actors continued going after local government, education providers, healthcare providers, because that's where the budget isn't in most cases, and it's a softer target.
Well, absolutely. Well, let's talk about something, I guess, which is core to this, which you're about to change your slide now. The cloud.
Boom.
Cloud.
You were talking about building security bunkers and using new tools and stuff. Absolutely, it's happening, but it's the flip side of what I was just saying. With that, the bonus of familiarity in some cases can disappear when you migrate to a newer technology like cloud. And it's really misconfiguration has been the issue with cloud. We still see that it's not really about leveraging or attacking vulnerabilities. It's about leveraging and attacking misconfigurations in cloud environments. And by far the most prevalent of those is S3 buckets that are open to the world. We saw in February of 22 a company called Civicom. They were like an online meetings provider. They lost 8 terabytes of meeting data. You can imagine how much proprietary and confidential stuff was included in that. July, later in the year, Pegasus Airlines lost about 6.5 terabytes of data. PII, passwords, secret keys, all the stuff that you don't want people to have.
That's right.
And both of those were unprotected S3 buckets, poorly configured S3 buckets. We are seeing threat actors deploying cryptocurrency miners to poorly configure cloud instances as well to abuse the processing power. And we are seeing ransomware groups begin taking an interest in cloud because of things like cloud backups and Active Directory. So for credential harvesting and stuff. And the big lesson for me, it's a short one because it's misconfiguration in the cloud, and it's poorly configured workloads of one kind or another, making it through the CI/CD pipeline to deployment. So you need to make sure that you are integrating security within that CI/CD pipeline at every stage, looking for clear text passwords, looking for security keys that shouldn't have been left behind, looking for best practice configuration being followed, those kinds of things. So it's a short and sweet lesson to learn, but it's definitely something to focus on for if you use cloud infrastructure for 2023.
Of course. Going forward, is your reading of that scenario that businesses are handing the security to a third party, and literally there's no oversight, or at least not enough oversight? No one's kind of checking what they're doing. They deliver this back to you're secure. There's your cloud environment is set up. Off you go, guys. And there is no checks and balances. That's simply that's not part of the strategy.
Yeah, I don't think it's about reliance on a third party. In fact, in some cases, reliance on a third party can be a good thing because that third party hopefully is a security expert. So those managed services can be really good for your security posture. I think a lot of it is not understanding the shared responsibility model with cloud. A lot of people just say, oh, I'm in cloud and cloud is secure, so that's good. Not realizing that actually your cloud provider is only responsible from ground up to this level, and from this level up, that's all on you. And a lot of people still don't grasp that shared responsibility model.
Indeed.
that it is possible to poorly deploy things and push them out.
Absolutely.
So I spoke about vulnerabilities with cloud. Obviously, that's not the big thing, but vulnerabilities continues to be a really important subject.
Yeah.
The thing with vulnerabilities are there are helpful ways to talk about vulnerabilities, and there are significantly less helpful ways to talk about vulnerabilities. One of the things, for example, that you will always hear is how many vulnerabilities have there been? Well, so far, it's probably, in fact, it has gone up because I saw an email from CISA this morning in my inbox of some new vulnerabilities. When I counted, when I made this slide, which was yesterday, there were 2,606 vulnerabilities over the course of 2022 so far, which is more than there were in 2021. So you go, oh, wow, things are getting worse. No, that's why it's unhelpful to talk about it in those terms.
Yeah, sure.
Things are not getting worse. There are more vulnerabilities. The average vulnerability severity has increased slightly, I think from like 7 to 7.1. So, but even that's not helpful. Every year since we started counting vulnerabilities, there have been more vulnerabilities every year, year on year, every year.
Sure.
So I wanted to find a couple of tools that offered people a helpful way to think about vulnerabilities rather than to think there are so many that I can't do anything about them. I'm overwhelmed. Let's not worry about it. And there are two really important ones. The first one is this, which is the CWE, the Common Weakness Enumeration Top 25 from MITRE. And this is not about individual vulnerabilities. This is about the weaknesses that those vulnerabilities are taking advantage of. And you can see, for example, that the number one on this list is out of bounds right. It was number one previously, it's still number one, and then number two was number two previously, it's still number two. Number one, for example, out of bounds right, that's a buffer overflow. That's something that we're very familiar with. We still see lots and lots of vulnerabilities. So this gives you a view of what weaknesses are attackers leveraging for successful exploitation of vulnerabilities. And the column that really counts in this is the other tool, which is the KEV count, KEV count. My friend Kev is really, really pleased that I've come up with the slogan, just ask Kev, but I don't mean Kev, the ex-copper. I mean Kev, the database. Although Kev, the ex-copper is a really nice guy too. But KEV is the known exploited vulnerabilities database from CISA. And you can see that number one, out of bounds right, has 62 known exploited vulnerabilities in the wild. So if you really want to think about which vulnerabilities are important to me as an organization and where do I need to focus my short-term attention on getting these things mitigated or patched, these two resources together, the CWE and KEV, will give you a very clear direction of how and where you should look. I mean, no conversation about vulnerabilities is complete without talking about 0 days. We have seen fewer than 2021 so far this year, significantly fewer, but that's because 2021 was an absolute banner year for 0-day vulnerabilities. We've seen 46 this year, possibly another 3, and there were 87 last year, and 87 last year was almost double what had happened in 2020. So 2021 was just a crazy year. Nevertheless, there have been some significant ones. Samba, there's been Spring for Shell was this year. There was what became called Proxy Not Shell, which was the 2 exchange vulnerabilities this year. So there are still some important 0 days out there. And they do get leveraged in criminal attack campaigns. These things are not reserved for nation state activity. But the question is, how do I prioritize the mitigation of that? And the answer is just ask Kev. The known exploited vulnerability database is a fantastic resource.
I think the takeaway then, of course, is I guess what you said right at the beginning was if you can't see it, then you can't protect it, or you're not understanding what your vulnerabilities are. So, of course, a lot of businesses will then say, well, how do I do that? How do I know what's vulnerable? And, of course, these these databases and these insights are, can we call them a metric? I don't want to load that word or with.
They're an intelligence feed, right? Yeah, it's not necessarily.
It's not a measure. I don't want to use the word metric because that has connotations with a lot of different. But they are insights, aren't they? They at least give you a starting point for how you then look at your systems in comparison.
And how you fight back against that burnout and that feeling of being overwhelmed with data and with information. I mean, I will go into that in a bit, but it's definitely something like an external resource where someone else has done a whole bunch of the legwork for you, and you need to I hate the word leverage, but it has a real meaning. It gets misused a lot, but you can leverage that. You can use that significantly to decrease the demands on you and your team and your time.
Indeed.
Of course, no discussion of last year and next year would be complete in many different ways, political, social, but also cybersecurity, without talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war in Ukraine. We have seen all the things you would expect to see in this kind of scenario: cyber attacks, disinformation, attacks on operational technology. We've also seen the rise of new attack groups. Right after the war broke out, we saw what you would expect, which is social engineering attacks, pretending to be charities, asking for money. And of course, they weren't charities. They were just criminals taking advantage of a big global event, which has happened year on year, event on event. Unfortunately, it continues to happen. But then we did see stuff specific to the invasion of Ukraine, which are things like very specific and targeted phishing attacks. We've seen significant numbers of wiper malware being deployed, so ransomware without a ransom, effectively destructive wiping malware, DDoS attacks, timed to coincide with the actual invasion. We saw, of course, the KA-SAT, the attack on the KA-SAT ground modems, where they managed to overwrite the firmware on these ground modems, knocking out a lot of comms capability for Ukraine, and also outside Ukraine as well. There's always collateral damage. So innovative stuff. We saw Indestroyer 2, which wasn't successful. The attack on OT, which the Ukrainians with help from partners managed to spot in advance and mitigate and stop. One of the interesting things that we saw Nuclear on the Block was hacktivist ransomware. It was in Belarusia, cyber partisans in Belarusia. They used a modified ransomware to attack the Belarusian ministry that controls the railways and stop the trains from moving. I mean, this was a destructive wiper/ransomware attack on the computers of the Belarusian Ministry for the Railways, but they managed to stop the trains moving, which stopped military personnel material being moved into the positions where the Russians wanted it. So significant on-the-ground consequences. We've seen disinformation continue on a global scale, of course, but we've seen the rise of new attack groups as well. Russian groups like Killnet, predating the conflict, the war, but closely aligned, externally with the war in Ukraine. Actually, that's one of the things that did for Conti, is that they aligned themselves very publicly with the Russian state objectives in Ukraine, and then obviously became a sanctioned entity. And then nobody could pay them any ransom anymore, which was part of the reason why they had to disappear, because they stopped getting ransom money because they were sanctioned. The Cyber Army of Russia. And on the Ukrainian side, we saw the IT Army of Ukraine, semi-official collective, and other groups like GhostSec, again, who predate the conflict but took the Ukrainian side, and new groups like One Fist. And they've carried out all kinds of attacks, some that are social, like the one on the left. Orbila is a Russian ticket selling website for events and cinema and so on, and you can see they replaced the thumbnail for every movie with this thumbnail of little devil Putin, and Putin with his makeup on in the top right corner, and it says in red text, if you can't read it, Russia is a terrorist state. So they were doing these kinds of defacement attacks, but something that really needs to concern us going forwards right now is it's on a personal level, personally speaking, absolutely laudable activity that One Fist are targeting operational technology within Russia to negatively impact the Russian capability to wage war. And you can see some examples of some of the ops here against operational technology, against wireless management type technology, and the consequences of that we see. These are some screen grabs from the one on the left is from One Fist, the one on the right is from GhostSec. They're claiming responsibility for explosions and fires. On the left, that is a military factory where they were fitting out military vehicles and trucks. And on the right, that was an electricity substation, both in Russia, both responsibilities claimed by these attack groups targeting operational technology. So we're very firmly now at the stage where fingers on a keyboard can have effects like the ones you see in the images. This has become run of the mill, and it's become mainstream. And like I said, as far as I'm concerned right now, from my own personal political point of view, this is fine. This is fine. But we do need to think about the future. What happens when the war is over, when Ukraine is victorious? What happens with these capabilities and these attack groups, and as their hacktivists, which causes do they espouse next, and what are the consequences of that? The big lesson to learn is that we have reached a new era where attacks on operational technology are no longer the preserve of nation-state threat actors, and they result in real severe physical damage, and you need to consider absolutely your OT within your whole security architecture. You can't afford to have it off in one corner anymore. Something we heard a lot about for a few years now has been deepfake, and its importance to the attack landscape, threat landscape. It's minor, to be honest. The deepfake video stuff, there's not many examples of it. There's maybe the one with the voice phishing attack with the German boss, but why would you bother using AI when you could just have someone who is really good at a German accent doing the same thing, right? What's the point? But something that's happened recently is not deep fake. I don't know what we're going to call it. I'm going to call it chat fake today. ChatGPT, which was released just a couple of weeks ago in beta, everybody's digging into it. Everyone's trying to work out the consequences, but it's a hugely capable, artificially intelligent chat bot operating on an API, which will automate all kinds of badness. It can generate really good phishing emails. It can generate at script speed all kinds of disinformation, misinformation, dodgy commercial phishing websites on demand. So that's going to scale up the ability and capability. So I'm less concerned about the video deepfake stuff, more concerned about the implications of whatever chat fake may be.
Indeed.
We spoke earlier on about burnout and information overload. If you think about what does today's reality really look like from a SOC perspective, SOCs are drowning in this huge volume of information. I found a recent survey from Palo Alto Networks, where they said that the average SOC team is dealing with about 11,000 alerts in every 24-hour period, and they have to manage around about 7 different intelligence feeds on an ongoing basis. And there is no way that the typical security operations center, or arguably any security operations center, is staffed to the levels to be able to deal with this, just on the triage level. If you want to visualize it, this is a stadium that it holds actually 10,000 people. So we're talking about 11,000 alerts. What you're asking your SOC to do is identify every single individual in this stadium, make sure they've got the right ticket for the right day and it's not a fake ticket, and make sure they didn't bring anything bad in with them every 24 hours. And every 24 hours, it's a new 10,000 people or 11,000 alerts. There's absolutely no way that a SOC can do that. If you imagine one alert takes maybe half an hour's work to do the triage, right? Is it a false positive? Has it been incorrectly prioritized? Should it be critical when actually it's not critical? Should it not be critical? Whatever. That half an hour's work around the alert. So if you've got 30 minutes work for 11,000 alerts, that's 5,500 hours of work to do in every 24-hour period. So when I put the maths together for that, that means that in order just to do that triage, so it's not response, to do the triage, you'd need a SOC team of 687 people. That's 3 shifts of 229 people doing 8-hour shifts just to do the triage.
Just to do it,
So that's why I say, it looks like this, because out of necessity, that means that stuff is not being read, not being actioned, because there's not enough hours in the day or people in the room. If data is the new oil, which is something that we hear a lot, then algorithms are the new refineries. It's what do we do with that data to turn it into a valuable resource, not just black stuff from the ground, right? And that's technology that's making its way into our SOCs right now. I agree very strongly with Ali Mellon from Forrester when she says the automated SOC is a pipe dream. It absolutely is, but there's an awful lot more that we can do to make our SOCs better at filtering the information up front for us.
Yes, that's the takeaway, isn't it? The previous couple of slides, I think so. Looking at that, well, it's an insurmountable problem. Well, you're not totally powerless. Complete automation, you say, is it's not really a practical application yet, and may never be. But there's plenty that can be done. to reduce that and to make your business more aware and more resilient, because that's kind of what you're talking about. It's getting that level of resilience as high as it possibly can for your business,
and making the people who work for you have a better time of it. I mean, if your SOC is burning out because they got to do all this donkey work, then something's got to give. Something has to change.
Yeah, indeed.
And if you can. People say, "Oh, isn't it going to put tier 1 SOC out of work?" No, it's going to make their jobs much better and much more interesting. They won't have to do that. They'll get the proper stuff escalated to them, which they can then follow up on. They can spend time explaining the activities taken by the AI, and they can do proper follow up and investigation. I tried to pull together a few principles of just things to focus on next year, top level concepts, and they were these. Make sure you can see everything that you need to secure. Like you said, if you can't see it, you can't secure it. Make sure any risk assessment that you do isn't a one-time only risk assessment. It must be ongoing, continuous, real-time, and tied in with that, then the policy enforcement must be of the same nature. It has to be dynamic, it has to be continuous, and it has to be real-time. If you don't have enforcement capability, then you don't have a security policy, you have a security wish list, which is a very, very different thing. Move further towards zero trust, eliminate trust from decision making within your security architecture, and focus on people, build this security culture. If there are 2 lessons that I would leave people with, always remember that you don't know what you don't know. If you don't spend enough time investigating something from every possible angle, then something that you think is one thing, when you look at it from another angle, could turn out to be entirely the opposite of what you thought it was initially. And finally, this is not a security posture.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thanks for those insights, Rick. I think there's a lot to be, a lot to be thought about there. But also, the takeaway is, yes, the security landscape is an evolving thing. It absolutely is for next year. Pay attention to, what's important for your business. What's in your pond. How secure is your pond? And if it isn't very secure, then there are clearly practical aspects of that which you need to address. But I think, don't think that you are kind of at the mercy of threat actors. It's not a case of, it's going to happen anyway. Yes, absolutely. I think you are going to have some kind of security issues. No system is ever 100% secure, of course not. But what you can do is identify what they are and move your business to becoming a more secure entity, it seems to me. Maybe not a bunker, maybe that's the wrong analogy, but certainly a stronger environment for your business is absolutely a practical thing which you can work on next year.
Yeah, I think, don't fall for the stuff that people fell for last year. That happens too often. If you get a chance to have that retrospective look and say, okay, what was happening in the year just gone by? Those things are not going to happen to me next year, because that's tip of the spear stuff, right? These happen in small scale ways in 2022. They will happen much more broadly in 2023. So if you can move yourself past that, onto the next tip of the spear, you're going to be less affected than people who don't change their practices, their configurations, their training policies, whatever it might be, whatever's relevant, to just stay at least on the crest of the wave.
Yeah.
Getting beyond everything, that's not possible. Like you said, nothing is ever going to be 100% secure. But if you pay enough attention, then moving beyond the stuff that's just about to be mainstream, that should be possible.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we've come to the end of our time for this one. I thought that was very informative, and I think also quite intensely practical, which I think everyone will really appreciate what we've been talking about today. What I would say to everyone is I would encourage you to visit Forescout for more information, and certainly some if you're looking for help and support with all of your security aspects, particularly if you're building maybe a new security policy. Forescout can absolutely help you with that. So again, thanks, Rick, for joining us today, and I hope to see you again soon.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Take care. Well, we've come to the end of Security Day 2022, hosted by Silicon UK and NetMedia Europe. We hope your business has found the key presentations given today to be enlightening and also of practical value to your enterprise as it navigates the digital security landscape. Until the next Security Day, I'd like to thank you all for attending, and I'll see you next year.